2 weeks ago, I hosted a workshop where I built an AI-powered resume optimization tool from start to finish. This turned out to be a very popular topic with 870 people signing up for the event. Given this big response, I wanted to share the recording here on YouTube for those who might have missed it. I don't typically post project-specific videos like this, so if this is something you want to see more of, let me know in the comments. And without any further ado, here's the recording.
So the whole genesis of this talk is that I posted a blog last month and it was like 5 AI projects you could build this weekend. And this was the first one, and it was kind of like, oh, this would be like a fun beginner friendly project, and saw it as a throwaway. But for whatever reason, people really gravitated toward this project. I decided to turn it into a lightning lesson because so many people were asking me how to implement this project specifically. And so just for a little background, maybe you saw this lightning lesson, the topic sounded interesting, but you're wondering like, who the heck is this guy? Why should I listen to him? It's a really good question. So I got into AI about 6 years ago. I was an AI researcher while I was getting my physics PhD, and maybe with the recent Nobel in physics going to AI researchers, that connection makes a little bit more sense today than maybe it did last year. Afterward, I got my first job in corporate. I was working at Toyota Financial Services as a data scientist. So that was really cool to not only get that academic view of AI, but also to see what it looks like in a practical business setting. And then after spending about a year there, I decided to go out on my own and pursue entrepreneurship, which has mainly consisted of doing some independent AI consulting work. Have helped over 100 clients in my first year of doing that. It was also like content creation. So maybe you've heard about me through my YouTube channel or my blog posts on Medium. More recently, I just launched a course on Maven and also been pursuing product development. So I actually launched my first product this month called Y2B, which converts YouTube videos into blog posts. And basically the under the hood of that product is very similar to the type of approach we're going to take in this lightning lesson. So let's just dive right into it. The whole motivation of this project is adapting your resume to different job descriptions is quite tedious. And I see one person saying people are unemployed in the chat here. So maybe this is a very practical project for you indeed. And another thing is that even if you have optimized your resume, say for like a data scientist role or like an ML engineer role or whatever role it might be, the same job title can have different definitions across different companies. So if you're a couple pretty comparable data scientist roles at Netflix and Google respectively, but if we kind of double click into what they're looking for, they're just slight differences in the job descriptions and what the roles look like at these specific companies. Even if you have that data scientist resume, kind of going in, reading the descriptions and optimizing it specifically for that description might be a little tedious. Or maybe you want to branch out. Maybe you work as a data scientist now and you want to go into ML engineering, or now we have these AI engineer roles. So you want to explore those and you have the right skills, but you just don't know how to pick out your experience to align it with the job description. And you might be thinking, can I use ChatGPT for something like this? And the answer is yes, you can definitely use ChatGPT for this. In fact, I would recommend starting with ChatGPT when building any kind of project like the one we're doing here. However, there are some key limitations with using these AI tools in this web interface like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever your favorite AI assistant is. One of which is that having these long prompts is quite tedious. So if I were to write out this really well-crafted prompt and put it into ChatGPT, I would have to like go in every single time and paste in the job description, and it could just be a little tedious to do this. But maybe that's not too bad. You don't mind going in. It's just like 10 jobs. You'll just go in, copy paste the job description into the prompt. But, if you say you have like 20 job descriptions, this can get quite tedious. So like the bulk processing of this task of resume rewriting may not be so convenient. The solution to this is we can automate this whole process using Python and OpenAI's Python API. This is actually a pretty broad strategy, and a wide range of use cases will follow the broad steps that we're going to follow in this specific example. So instead of just doing everything in ChatGPT, what this will look like is you'll take your resume, you'll take whatever job description you like, you'll pass it into your Python script, which will make the API call to OpenAI, and then out will come your new resume. Just to break this down into a flowchart, this is the basic steps that we're going to want to follow when implementing this project. So the first step is we're going to need to import the resume resume and the job description that we want to adapt it to. Next, we're going to want to construct a prompt, and we'll see how we can do that efficiently in Python. And then we're going to take that prompt and send it to OpenAI via their API, just like we would if we were to type it into ChatGPT. And then finally, we'll want to display and save the results. The example code for this is freely available on this GitHub repository. It's AI Builders Bootcamp 2. I'll send you a link to this afterward, or if someone wants to share it in the chat, that would be much appreciated as well. And then with that, we can just jump into the example code. So let's just walk through this. We're going to implement those 4 basic steps that I mentioned on the slides. So we're going to import a handful of Python libraries. The key one here is this OpenAI library. And then I have a couple other libraries down here, which will actually allow us to take the output from GPT-4o Mini and we can export it as a PDF. So this is actually going to give you a PDF resume that you can submit directly to a potential employer. Our very first step is to import the resume and job description. So we can do that pretty easily in Python. So this is how you can read files into Python. So I have my resume saved as a .md file, which stands for Markdown. And we can actually take a look at what that looks like. So if we go in here, we see that we have something that looks like a resume, but it has all this weird like syntax and these hashtags and asterisks and bullet points. Basically, Markdown is a language for formatting text. And one of the upsides of using Markdown is that it can allow you to have a single representation of a text document, but then dynamically restyle it as needed, kind of customize the styling downstream. If you're not familiar with Markdown, I would recommend learning it because it's actually something that's really handy to know when prompting large language models. We can actually display this Markdown text in Jupyter Lab directly, and that's using this display markdown function that we imported earlier. And so this is what my resume looks like. You can see that we have links here, my education, tech skills, different work experience. So I kind of just dumped a wide range of experiences in here, and then just some other things like awards and honors and publications and things like that. The next thing we want to do is to import the job description. So I already imported one from Netflix, but we can actually rerun this. And so what I did here is I'm using this input function from Python, which will actually stop running the script until that point, and it will wait to get a user input. What we can do is go and grab any job description we like. So we see data scientist research YouTube, data scientist at Google, and this actually sounds kind of perfect for me. I've done research. I'm posting on YouTube and a data scientist. So let's just go ahead and copy this job, and we'll come back over here. I'll paste it into here. And now we can see that text is now represented as this JD string variable in Python. So now that we have both the resume and job description imported, we can now construct the prompt that we're going to pass into GPT-4o Mini. Here I'm defining this prompt template, and it's just like a regular prompt you're going to pass into ChatGPT, but there's one interesting thing that we can do in Python, which is actually very powerful. So we have these curly braces, and I'm actually inserting these 2 variables within these curly braces. And so what that's telling Python to do is to take these string variables that we've defined earlier and to dynamically insert them into the prompt. And I'm doing this as a so-called lambda function. What that means is that this prompt template will actually be a function which we can pass in any resume string and any job description string, and it'll automatically craft this entire prompt for us. So we can see that in action here. I'm creating a prompt using this prompt template function. So it looks like this. And then we can actually print this prompt to see what it looks like. Okay, so it's like a big monstrosity. Let me actually do the print function. It'll print it out more nicely. It's a very long prompt, but it has my resume here and it's inputting that markdown file. And then we can see the job description and it's inputting the job description here. And I guess before moving on, it's worth just briefly discussing the prompt and where this came from. My general strategy for writing prompts from scratch is basically to ask ChatGPT or any large language model to write the prompt for me. So for this one, I just went to ChatGPT and I asked it, please write me a prompt for GPT-4o Mini that takes in my resume and a job description and rewrites it for that particular job. And kind of the key intuition of why that's helpful is that language models think a little differently than we do. And so it's better to have the language model write a prompt that's going to eventually be given to another language model because it will frame the problem or the task in a way that makes sense for another language model. And another thing is that these prompts are so long, I don't want to meticulously sit through and write it. I'd rather have ChatGPT just quickly write me something in like 30 seconds, and then I can go in and modify it as needed. So that's exactly what I did here. So I started with this and I generated a few outputs, and then basically I would just tweak it if I didn't like how the output came out. So an example of it is that originally ChatGPT didn't write these two bullet points here under the guidelines, which was to limit work experience to the 2 or 3 most relevant roles and to limit bullet points to the 2 or 3 most relevant. So I added that in because I don't want the resume to be too long. I want it to all fit on one page. But everything else basically came directly from ChatGPT. Another thing we'll notice is that it's added in this additional suggestions. So not only is it going to write out the resume and optimize it for that job description, if there are any gaps in the resume and the job description, it's going to give suggestions for how we can fill in those gaps to make our application more compelling for that particular job. So that's just like a practical thing for solving this specific problem. And then we see that it's going to output it in a clean markdown format. Now that we have our prompt ready to go, we can just send it to OpenAI just like we would if we were to type it into ChatGPT. One of the upsides of using the API, other than you could write a Python script to automate this for like 100 resumes pretty easily, is that you can get access to these other parameters for customizing the model's response. So one of the key ones to know about is temperature, which essentially controls the, we can say, randomness of the output response. So in other words, a very high temperature will result in responses that are basically like nonsense and unrelated to the input prompt. And temperatures that are very low will correspond to very predictable and responses with high regularity. A temperature of 0.7 is a nice baseline to start out with because it'll generate relevant responses, but it won't be so boring and predictable. And then we'll just pass in our prompt like this. So we can also define a system message, which basically sets the tone or the general instructions to the model that we're prompting. And then we're going to send it the prompt like this. So we're basically just inputting the prompt that we just made right here. The last thing I'll mention is that here we're using GPT-4o Mini rather than GPT-4o. And the reason is that a lot of times for simple tasks, you don't need to use GPT-4o, and GPT-4o Mini will do a well enough job. And it's also like 20 times cheaper to use GPT-4o Mini. So I always recommend to start with a smaller, cheaper model, refine the use case, refine your prompt, refine how you're formatting the text and all that. And then if you need to go up to a bigger model, you can do that later on. Okay, so just with this single function call, we can get the response from GPT-4o Mini. We can extract the response like this. So all that's happening here is that this response is like a broader object. You can actually have it return multiple choices, so like multiple outputs. So you could like set the number of responses to like 3, and instead of just one resume, it'll spit out 3 resumes, and you can pick whichever one you like. But here I just generated one, and I'm going to pick that one out. And then we can extract the message, which is like this messages attribute here, and the content of the message like this. And then we're left with this response string. Just briefly taking a look at that, we can print that out, and we can see that the output looks something like this. So it looks just like the input markdown file that we saw here, but there are some tweaks. So one, it split my technical skills into 3 sections rather than just 2. So before I just had tools and certifications. Now there are programming languages, tools and technology certifications, work experience. Indeed, it did limit it to 3 rather than the, let's see how many I put here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. and instead of the 6 I put here. And then it truncated the publications from 11 down to 2. So we can see that it made it more concise and more relevant for this role. Let's take a closer look at it. It didn't mention anything like any of my YouTube experience, so maybe it didn't deem that relevant. It just focused on the data science roles and the research roles that I've held. But I feel like adding in something about YouTube might help this application as well. But then we can actually scroll down and we can see the model also has these additional suggestions. So let's see, it's to add experimentation design, A/B testing. I might read this and be like, oh, I've actually done this in a past project. I did a whole blog series on causal inference. So maybe I'll add that in because it's something that I've done. It just wasn't something that was in my resume. Let's see, strong emphasis on statistical techniques like regression analysis, hypothesis testing. So this was something I did at all my different roles, like so as a research assistant and at Toyota. So I could just add in some specific instances on that to make it more aligned. And then familiarity with data visualization tools beyond Tableau. So I haven't used Power BI or D3JS, so there's really nothing I could do there. These are just like helpful suggestions for making the resume more compelling. And then what we can do next is to display the results. Here, what I'm going to do is I'm taking this output string here, and I'm going to split it into 2 parts. Basically, everything before this additional suggestions bit, and then everything after this additional suggestions bit. And then I'm going to print them out. If we print out the first bit, which is the updated resume, it'll look something like this. It looks similar to my original resume with the appropriate tweaks. And then now that we have this markdown version of the new resume, we can actually save it as a PDF. The way I'm doing that is using this, going all the way back up, using this Wheezy print Python library as well as this markdown library. So let me just explain what's happening here. So first, we're defining the name of the file we want to export the new resume as. So I'm just going to call it resume new.pdf. And then we can take the raw markdown text that came from GPT-4o Mini, and we can convert it to HTML using this markdown library. So that's what this line of code is doing. It'll take this markdown text and convert it into HTML. And then using that Wheezy print library, we can export this HTML content as a PDF. I just have this style sheet as well, which will customize the styling of the PDF so it doesn't look so ugly. And actually the styles here is something I asked ChatGPT to generate for me because I'm not a web developer. I don't know CSS, but I know enough to modify and hack the code if I have a file in front of me. Asking ChatGPT to do this is a really handy trick. So we can just see what that looks like. It's just a regular CSS file, and it's just setting the font sizes, the font family, the size of the headers, size of the margins, and all that boring stuff. So I can pull up the resume actually. And so this is what the output resume looks like. It's a little longer than 1 page, which should be fine. I mean, even we could drop this second page and it wouldn't be such a big deal. And we can see this looks pretty nice. We can click on these links and we can see that they indeed do work. We can click on this and yep, it'll take me to my LinkedIn page. So the links work. And then we have everything that was laid out there. Okay, so let's go back to the script. So that's how we export it as a PDF. We can also save the markdown file if for whatever reason we didn't like how this PDF was formatted and we wanted to go online and find a markdown reader or something like that. And then we can paste in the new resumes markdown file into that converter. And then finally, we can just print out the suggestions from GPT-4o Mini. And that's what this looks like. So we're doing pretty good on time. Let me just close all of these out. And then I'm going to just skim the chat for questions. Shaji asks, can the prompts generated by one model be used as an input to another model? Yeah, you can definitely do that. I haven't robustly tested this and done experiments on it, but my intuition is that if you want to, say, write a prompt for GPT-4o Mini, it might be a good idea to use GPT-4o Mini or GPT-4o. And my intuition there is that it probably has a better understanding of itself, to put it one way. API, but you can use any model. I actually used, on my first iteration of this, I used Llama 3.2 to write this prompt because ChatGPT was down for whatever reason. Yes, the recording will be shared, so don't worry if you joined late. Does the Claude API work in the same way? I haven't used Claude's API, but I suspect it's very similar. Maybe someone with more experience with Claude's API can correct me if I'm wrong. Would it be possible to save the styling of the input resume PDF and use it to generate the output one? Oh, that's a really interesting question. What you could do is take your current PDF, like go to ChatGPT or whatever AI assistant you like, upload the PDF, and just ask it to write you a CSS file to copy the styling of that PDF. And while it probably won't be perfect, it'll be a good starting point. Okay, which editor are you using? This is Jupyter Lab, and you can install it using the requirements file. Great question, Christian. Is there a way to have a simple interface to use it? That is the next example. So let's keep going on with that. So here we walk through the code, and now we understand like the guts of this, but this isn't really practical. This is kind of just as bad as copy pasting it to ChatGPT. Maybe it's slightly easier, but we still have to like go find the resume, input it here, run the whole notebook, and it's like this whole thing. So let's just create like a simple user interface to run this whole process. I really like Gradio for simple web apps like this, and it's just a Python library for making simple ML apps. This one cell is everything you need to create a Gradio application. So let me just like show you what it looks like and we can walk through it. Here we have a title and a brief description. We have a place where we can upload my resume and paste the job description. It'll optimize the resume and then everything will be exported down here. So let me find my resume. So we can take the resume, just paste it over here. We can go find a job description. Let's do a new one. Oh yeah, let's go to BlackRock. They are quite successful and well known. So let's copy all their qualifications and then we'll paste it right into here. And then we can click this optimize resume button. So one of the reasons it's taking so long is we've got a long resume and quite a long job description, but eventually it got it. So here's what the new resume looks like. So BlackRock, private equity company, is probably going to highlight the work at Toyota Financial because there's probably a lot of overlap. So it used a very similar work experience. You know, maybe I would be better off including more bullet points in my original resume, maybe like 5 to 10 bullet points under each job, and then having the model pick out the ones that are most relevant. But what's really nice about this is that we can go to this additional suggestions area and we can see that there's indeed some opportunities to improve it. So like add skills like front-end frameworks like JavaScript and Streamlit. You know, while I haven't used these, maybe I can mention my experience with Gradio and link some projects as well, because Streamlit and Gradio are very similar. Knowledge of GCP or Azure. So I have used GCP on a project, so I can mention that project in there. And then, you know, just kind of updating it there. And actually I've created this little UI here to update the resume in a pretty simple way. So like taking a look at it, we can see that I have never used RShiny or Flask. I don't know where I got that crazy idea from, so I can actually just delete that. And then maybe I'll add like Gradio, and then I'll add GCP as well. And then let's see, we'll leave all that the same. And then we can just click this export as a resume button, and we can see it was successfully exported. And then if we go here, bring the resume over, and we can see that indeed it made the changes and exported the resume. Maybe if we don't want to have this second page here, we can go back and just delete this and then re-export. And we can see now it's just one page here. I like Gradio because you can like pretty easily make these simple user interfaces, and it just makes it like slightly more convenient to interact with these things. And so I'll just briefly walk through it. Won't spend too much time on this, but happy to answer specific questions if you have it. Basically, you can imagine the way Gradio works is we're building the web page from top to bottom. So at the very top, we have the title, which is this thing here, and this description, which is this thing here. And these are these markdown blocks. So we input it in the markdown syntax. One hashtag is like a title. No hashtag is like body text. Then we can have a section where we gather all the inputs. So this with rows thing will basically allow us to arrange elements horizontally. So that's exactly what we're doing here. So we're arranging this file upload and paste job descriptions in a single row. And then I have this button here to optimize the resume. The way these buttons work is that they essentially represent functions. We take this run button, which we defined up here, and then we have this click method, which allows us to connect the click of this button to a function. function. The function here is called process resume. It's basically what we defined in the first notebook, but it's a user-defined function that will take in the resume job description and send it into ChatGPT. But I've just abstracted it into a single function call. And then these are the inputs of that function. And then we're saving the outputs as these variables here. By clicking on this button, it's going to grab resume input and JD. So resume input, JD input, and it's going to spit out output resume MD, output resume, and output suggestions, which we're using here, here, and here. Below this button, we have these outputs. So this is the markdown version of the new resume. This is a markdown version of the suggestions. And then we have this text cell, which allows us to edit the new resume. So this is the output resume in markdown format. These are the suggestions in a markdown format. And then we have this text box, which we can edit. That's what this interactive true allows us to do, which we can make the changes that we like. And then we can have a button to export it as PDF. And then if the export is successful, we just have this export results variable get created. And then we just launch the app like this. Happy to answer specific questions about the Gradio interface or anything on the notebook as well. Can you connect external CSS file to Gradio page? That's a good question. I'm sure you can, because you can actually have custom HTML blocks in Gradio as well. I just haven't done that before, but I'm pretty sure that's something you can do. Okay, so I think we're doing pretty good on time. Let's keep going along here. So I'll do a Q&A up until the hour, and I'll even stick around for like an extra 30 minutes after the hour if people have more questions. But I'll just call out the AI Builders Bootcamp. We're in cohort 1 now, but cohort 2 is coming up on January 10th, and it's going to run till February 21st. The main premise of the bootcamp is to learn AI through building it, through practical examples. So kind of like the example we built here. Along the way, we had to learn a lot of concepts. We had to learn about prompt engineering, learn about APIs, learn a little bit about CSS, learn about Markdown, learn about HTML. You pick up a lot of skills through building. And ultimately, you can learn concepts and take courses all day, but really the truth is in the code, as they say. When it comes to actually taking these ideas and implementing them into reality, it takes code to do that. So I think it's just one of the best ways to learn. Here's a quick overview of what the course includes. We'll build a bunch of projects, and then there'll be homework where you can build your own projects, and I'll give you feedback, and you can get feedback from others in the cohort. It seems like 3 types of people have taken cohort 1 and seem to get value out of it. So first are like technical professionals, whether you're coming from IT or software development, or maybe you work as a data scientist or data analyst, but LLMs and this new wave of Gen AI and these new AI models are new and unfamiliar. Those types of people, business leaders and product managers, maybe you want to lead AI initiatives and, bring AI to your org, or maybe you're like a engineering VP or like a head of engineering, head of data, but you haven't coded in like 5 or 10 years and you want to keep up with this rapidly evolving AI landscape. And then finally, entrepreneurs, people trying to build products with these new AI tools. The cohort is $700, but as a lightning lesson promo and thank you, you can use this code lightning40 and you'll get 40% discount, saving almost $300 on cohort 2. And of course, this is a huge investment. I'm aware of that. Like $420 even is a fair amount of money for a lot of people. So there's still a ton of free content on my YouTube channel, on my Medium blog, and the example codes from these cohorts are made freely available on GitHub. So there's something for everyone, depending on what your goals are and what you need. With that, let's do Q&A. So we'll do 15 minutes of like official Q&A, but I'll also be happy to stick around for like 30 minutes after we end here. Any ideas as to what types of projects we are building in the course? Yeah, so that's a good question. Let me go to the GitHub, AI Builders Bootcamp 1. So this will give you a flavor. This is the GitHub for the current cohort, and you can go through and take a look at all the different projects that we've built. And these are just the class projects. People have been building really interesting projects as their homework, optional homework, and they share the example code with everyone. So it's not just these examples that you can learn from. You can also learn from fellow cohort members. Are there any early bird offers for the course? So right now, the 40% discount is the main offer right now. Any suggestions suggestions for those who don't know Python. Should I learn Python? If so, where? This is a really good question. Although you can go really far with like these no code tools and like Claude's UI or ChatGPT's UI or something like that, I still think if you're trying to build custom solutions, like you're trying to build products or you're trying to build projects, learning Python is still important. And it also allows you to use these models in more sophisticated and advanced ways. So I think you should definitely learn Python. I have a Python intro on my YouTube channel. Maybe I can find it real quick. This is like a great entry point for people. Here we go. Mini course for getting started. And so I have the same philosophy of like learning Python as I do with learning AI, which is like the best way to learn is by building projects. So, just learn just enough to start coding or start building specific projects because you're going to learn a lot. Do you have to be technical to attend this boot camp? Can a product manager? Yes. So this is meant to be accessible to product managers, non-technical people, as well as technical people. So like the first half of the course is probably review for a lot of technical folks, but for the people who are new to AI and machine learning, it'll be a lot of good foundational information. I think actually like 60% or 70% of people in cohort one have less than 1 year of machine learning experience. How much coding experience is recommended for the AI Builder Bootcamp? I would say 1 year is good because if you know absolutely nothing about Python, and this is relevant to Poonam's question as well, if you know nothing about Python, there's going to be a bit of a learning curve to just like get it set up on your machine and start coding up projects. So I'd say like 1 year helps a lot. But really, the coding is optional. Some people, they get value from just coming to lectures, hearing the discussion, and then also we'll do these like post-lecture discussions, which isn't like me lecturing, but it's just everyone having like free-flowing discussion. And then the non-technical people seem to get a lot of value out of those more free-flowing, broad discussions. Have you or anyone else seen improvements in round one calls by tailoring resumes to job descriptions? That's a good question. I haven't tried that, but it's definitely worth trying out. While this is going to be a helpful tool for people trying to find jobs or whatever it is, it's still like a pretty nascent project. Like if you want to turn this into like a product or something like that, more work is going to need to be done. Examples are fine for personal use cases. What is taught in the bootcamp to cover enterprise use cases that include guardrail security, integrating production grade applications and scalability? So that's a really good question because these projects are a great entry point, great to learn the concepts and build out these like simple prototypes. But when it comes to like building an app that is going to have like 100,000 users or something like that, or like 1 million users. And this is relevant for companies where they have well-established products, but maybe they want to build out these AI features. The current version of the course, we don't cover guardrails or deploying things because there's such a wide range of ways to deploy apps, especially in AI. There's just really not a practical way for me to cover it in class that's applicable to a wide range of people and a wide range of needs. But I plan on incorporating like evals and guardrails and these other things in future cohorts. That's another thing that's worth calling out. It's still the early days of this course. So I'm very much learning from the students in what it is that they're interested in learning. And then I'm going and working and trying to put that content together and make it accessible for people. Can a generated CV be auto-magically imported to a CV template or Word doc? That's not something I tried, but that's a really good question. There are tools like Pandoc and other like converter tools. So you can input Markdown and convert it to like a docx file, for example. So I'm sure something like that exists and is out there, but it's not something that I've done personally. Can't we use Cursor AI to do the coding after giving prompt instead of developing PyScript in Jupyter? For sure. So I use Cursor a lot actually, and I really enjoy it. The demo here and the demos in class, I use Jupyter Lab just because it's easier to walk through than like a dense Python script. But yeah, you can definitely use Cursor. Does your course cover any agentic AI frameworks? That's a good question. Actually, someone taking the course emailed me and asked if we could cover that just today. So cohort one, we didn't cover AI agents, but I plan on incorporating that into cohorts 2 and 3. That's on the agenda. Can you share promo code again? So the promo code is Lightning40. Also, I'll share the slides afterward. And this is a link that you can click on. This is also a link you can click on, and it'll automatically send you to the course page with the discount applied. Let's see, in the data engineering section, how deep will you go using smart NICs for instance. So we don't cover smart NICs. The ETL and data engineering in the course is really the basics and fundamentals. It's just enough to build basic machine learning projects and AI projects. So imagine if you're familiar with like a data science role or an ML engineering role, it's about as much data engineering that a data scientist or a machine learning engineer needs to know. Not necessarily the data engineering that a data engineer will need to know, because they're usually not just interested in specific projects, but they are tasked with managing the data infrastructure of an entire enterprise or an organization. So we won't cover that kind of data engineering in ETL, but we will talk about it on a project by project basis. No Kubeflow either. I haven't used that, and it's usually not necessary for one-off projects. Do you think we could add to this function a way to pick the model, let's say Claude in GPT? Yeah, for sure. Let me go to that functions.py. So I have this function get resume response. Another thing we could do is have the ability to take in different input models. And then what we could do is just have some basic logic in here that says if GPT-4o do the API call like this, if Claude 3.5 Sonnet or whatever the smaller one is called, I think it's Haiku actually. So if you have Claude 3.5 Haiku, use this other piece of code or something like that. But that's something you can easily incorporate into this function here. How many tokens comes in for a single resume? Is there a way to print the cost of a single resume generation in the UI? Yeah, you definitely can, because OpenAI posts their API costs. Input tokens and output tokens are priced slightly differently. You can get the API inputs and the outputs, count the number of tokens. Then you can just compute the API costs by multiplying the total number of input tokens by the input token cost, multiply the number of output tokens by the output token cost, and then you'll get the API cost. But I'll just say for context, I ran this probably a couple dozen times in developing the example, and it cost me like 5 cents. So generally the API costs are super cheap, especially if you're using GPT-4o Mini. How to pass resume template and create resume exactly similar to the template? That's a good question. And that's one of the upsides of using Markdown. Since my resume string, the one that I inputted here, is already in Markdown, the model will follow that same exact output. That's just like a thing that happens automatically when you pass in your resume in the format that you like. When you submit out resume to AI, does our data sent to public domain? Is it fine? Okay, yeah, so that's a good question. If you use ChatGPT's user interface, OpenAI can and likely will use your inputs for improving the model. So there is a chance of data that you paste into ChatGPT making its way to the public indirectly through being used to train future versions of the model. However, that's not the case with the API. The API, they do not use that data for further training. That's another upside of using the API as opposed to using ChatGPT's UI. Do we need ChatGPT API key for the code you provided? Yes. So that's a good question. I'm importing my API key here. So I have this Python script called top secret, and there's a string defined in that script called mySK, and then that's my OpenAI API key. Generally, if you want to use these APIs, you're going to need to have an API key. Would you consider doing another follow-up lightning round where you store resumes in a vector database and use an LLM to match the best candidate? That's a really good question. It's very possible that next time I do a lightning lesson, I can cover something like that, but I can point you to the example code here. If you go to AI Builders Bootcamp 1, go to the repo, and then you can go to session 4 and look at this RAG chatbot over blog series. It's going to be slightly different, but this will give you a sense of like how you can do that kind of system. And maybe you don't even need to have a LLM hooked up to it. You could just have like a semantic search, basically where you paste in the job description and then you find the resumes which are most similar to that job description. But yeah, I can imagine that's a really powerful use case for hiring managers and recruiters and whatnot. For participants in Bootcamp 2, do we need to pass and read Bootcamp 1? While it'll probably be helpful to kind of skim through these examples in Bootcamp 1 and look through the syllabus to make sure it aligns with your goals and what you're trying to learn, it's not necessary. It's not like a Bootcamp 1 is a prerequisite for Bootcamp 2. We're at the hour. If anyone needs to drop, all good. Thanks for joining. I will again share the recording and the GitHub repo and the slides. But if anyone wants to stick around and chat and have questions, I'll be here for like another 30 minutes and happy to answer questions or just have like a more general discussion about AI.